Chapter 671 The Warmth of the Night. Hugh. Resting her head on her arms, Emma let out a deep sigh. Emma, training will start tomorrow at 5 a.m. in the morning. Make sure that you're not late. Emma caught a glimpse of a message sent by her dad. Ever since she reunited with her father, she had spent most of her time training with him. There was no better teacher for her than him. If only there was a way for me to become stronger faster. Nowadays she felt sour just thinking of Kevin. Every time she tried to initiate a conversation with him, he would do everything in his power to avoid it and then quickly flee the scene. Whether it was in a human domain union, he would always dodge her. Tisk, what's gotten into him? After only a few short years, Emma was unable to fathom how Kevin could have undergone such a dramatic transformation. During their time together at the academy, she had the impression that their relationship was doing well, and she didn't believe that she had done anything that could have caused tension between them. So what exactly is up with him? Emma ruffled her hair in annoyance. If only I could be more like Melissa. For the first time in her life, Emma experienced feelings of envy toward Melissa's seeming apathy toward everything. If she were more like her, then none of the problems that she was currently going through would be a problem for her. She would just brush them off with a look of annoyance on her face. Don't want to talk to me? Cool. Now go. I have other things to do. She could already imagine the sort of things Melissa would say had she been in a similar situation to hers. You know what? Fuck him. A determined expression appeared on Emma's face as she smacked the table. She had grown tired of waiting around for Kevin to come back to her and talk to her. She decided that going forward she would have nothing more to do with Kevin. She had made up her mind. Even if Kevin comes back to me all beat up and injured and begs me to help him, I'll just ignore him. See if that will make you regret your decision. She made a vow to herself. One that she planned on keeping regardless of what was going to happen next. Crash. Hate. Emma was startled when the sudden echoing of a crashing sound occurred, which prompted her to spring from her seat in response and caused her heart to palpitate out of her chest. Her head snapped immediately back and she was taken aback to see Kevin kneeling down on the ground with both hands on the ground, his complexion looking very pale. Kevin. What's going on? She immediately rushed to him, completely forgetting what she had been thinking moments ago. PFDE. Kevin. The sight of Kevin spitting blood out of his mouth caused her facial expression to become even tenser. It appeared as though he was having trouble focusing his eyes, and he was breathing in a very labored manner. Raising his head, his eyes met her and he smiled at her. Thud. His body fell to the ground after that and he passed out. Kevin. It was dark. Kevin was engulfed in darkness and suffered from multiple bouts of pain as he floated in and out of consciousness. After regaining consciousness for a split second, he would feel a searing pain that persisted all over his body, which would cause him to fall back into a state of unconsciousness once more. Before he even realized what was happening, he felt a twitch in his eyelids and then very slowly his eyes opened. Where am I? Kevin mumbled, adjusting his focus with a few blinks of his eyes and taking in a fuller picture of his surroundings. It seemed as though he was in a room that was fairly large, with walls that were a faded light pink color, a large TV screen in the middle of the room as well as a sizable desk and chair. The room, which was adorned with flowers, exuded the soothing scent of lavender throughout its entirety. When Kevin looked down and felt something heavy resting on his legs, he finally realized where he was and his face stiffened. Emma. Faint recollections of what had transpired a few hours prior resurfaced in Kevin's mind and he let out another groan as he grasped the side of his waist, which was now bandaged. Everything worked out. Indeed, his plan had worked. But it wasn't without consequences. Kevin had sustained serious injuries. He let out another groan. Grave isn't even enough to cover the extent of my injuries. Still, it was worth it. All along he had never planned on killing Malik al-Shaytan. His goal was to seal off the other Ren. Kevin knew that he was going to be the biggest thorn in his plan. He had intentionally lied to Ren about the plan. There was a good chance that the other him would discover the situation through him. It was a way for him to lure the other Ren in case he was able to see exactly what Ren was doing. Law number 3. Conceal your intentions. Keep those around you uncertain and vague by never revealing the purpose behind your actions. If they have no idea what you're planning, they won't be able to prepare the defense. guide them far enough in another direction, shroud them in a smoke screen, and by the time they discover your designs, it will be too late. Cough, cough. Kevin violently coughed, a bitter, iron-like sensation tingling his taste buds. His chest violently ached and Kevin felt his arms tremble with pain. Kevin. Kevin's body froze upon hearing the one voice he didn't want to hear. He slowly lowered his head to see Emma looking back at him with a sleepy face. It was obvious that she had not slept the entire time while she was taking care of him. All sorts of complicated thoughts flashed across his eyes as he gazed at Emma. In all honesty, it had never been his intention to go to her. It's just that at the time, the repercussions of his actions were a lot more powerful than he had initially anticipated, and she was the first person he thought of when he was trying to look for someone to help him. It had never been his intention to go to her, but the situation had led him to her, and now that he was face to face with her, he wasn't sure what to say. His silence prompted Emma to furrow her brows as she glared at him. "Don't you have anything to say to me?" she inquired while pulling her head away from her arms and rising to her feet. She looked down at Kevin, who was lying on her bed with his back against the wooden frame of the bed. Raising his head to meet her line of sight, Kevin felt something stuck in his throat. There were many things that he wanted to say to her. A lot of things. The current her, the previous her, and all the other versions of her. The list was endless, and he hadn't been distancing himself for the reason she was thinking of. He didn't think of her as a burden, nor did he ever. Be it past, present, or future, Kevin had only ever loved one girl, and it was Emma. But be it past, present, or future, Kevin had only suffered heartbreak, and so had she. Their story was never meant to be a happy one. The moment Kevin learned about his past, he knew what he had to do. This was the last ever regression. The last one. That was it. Turning back time was no longer possible. The Akashic records had reached a point where they could no longer sustain a time renewal, and regardless of what happened next, time reversal was no longer something that this universe could withstand. It would simply disintegrate together with the records and everything else that existed within the universe. His passing would no longer cause time to roll back, but that was precisely what Kevin had been hoping to achieve all along. There was a good explanation for why he was unable to prevail over Jezebeth at any point during the numerous regressions. It wasn't because he couldn't, but because he wouldn't. This may have been the last regression, but it was also the one opportunity he had to set everything straight. Every time renewal would result in the records exhausting a power of their powers. A single renewal wouldn't have much of an impact on the records, but what if it happened multiple times? What if it occurred tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even millions of times? By then, wouldn't the records reach a point where they could no longer sustain a regression? Wouldn't the records reach a point where they became so weak that perhaps a mortal being could actually reach them? "Kevin, are you even listening to me?" Emma's voice brought Kevin out of his thoughts, and his head snapped toward her direction. The sight of her tears streaming down her cheeks immediately startled him, and he extended his hand forward, trying to wipe away her tears. Why are you crying? Don't touch me. Smack. Emma smacked his hand away and turned around, using her arm to wipe away at her tears. "I don't understand what has suddenly gotten into you, but at the very least I think I deserve an explanation. If you don't like me anymore or if you found someone else, then just tell me. Why must you keep me in the dark and make me suffer so much?" Emma's shoulders trembled and she started to choke on her words. "It hurts, you know." Kevin's head lowered when he saw the state that Emma was in, his arms resting over his legs. He opened his mouth and said, ending, it's not going to be a good one." Emma turned around. Tears were still streaming down her cheeks, but more than anything, there was a confused look on her face. "What are you talking about?" Kevin smiled at her. He gave her the saddest smile he had ever given her and repeated himself. "From the moment I was born, my ending was already set in stone." He slowly raised himself up and out of the bed. A sharp pain pierced his abdomen area, but he ignored it and got up. He inched closer to Emma and slowly lifted her chin with his finger. "I am distancing myself from you not because I find you burdensome or because I have found someone else. Even if I had 1,000,000 lives, I don't believe I'll ever fall for another person." Kevin suddenly laughed. Even though he laughed normally, there was an underlying sadness contained in his laughter. "The only reason why I am distancing myself from you is that I know that my ending isn't going to be a happy one." He slowly brought his head forward and murmured, "Maybe this is what I deserve for what I have done, or maybe I was just born this way, but staying with me won't make you happy." He continued to move his head forward, and it wasn't long before his lips touched something soft. "I am cursed." Chapter 672. The warmth due the night. My eyelids were partially closed when suddenly I was jolted awake by a bright light that penetrated the spaces between them. My thoughts were all over the place, and all of a sudden memories from the previous night began to flood back into my consciousness. My eyes opened as I was gently embraced by a warm sensation coming from the right side of my body. It was extremely soft, and for a moment I was almost tempted to close my eyes and go back to sleep. A familiar ceiling appeared within my immediate vision, and I knew that I was inside my room. Laying on my bed, Amanda was beside me. Her eyes were closed and the covers were pulled up to her chin. Her arm was positioned so that it was leaning over me, and she had a firm grip on my waist. She was sound asleep. So it really happened. I turned my body so that it faced Amanda and looked directly at her face. Glossy cherry lips, smooth skin that was completely free of any blemishes, and glossy black hair that fell in a sleek manner and covered her face. How cute! As her hair continued to fall in her face, I couldn't help but laugh when I noticed that it would occasionally cause her nose to twitch and her mouth to pout. My hand moved forward unconsciously and smoothed her hair behind her ear as I admired her beauty at that very moment. My heart felt oddly at peace while I faced her, and if possible, I wanted to stay like this for as long as possible. It was so nice. Amanda gradually opened her eyes, clearly startled awake by my actions. She appeared to be somewhat groggy and had to blink a couple of times to get a better understanding of what was going on. Her eyes quickly regained their clarity, and a faint blush began to spread across her cheeks. "Morning," she muttered shyly with a small smile on her face. I answered her back with a smile. "Morning." The light filtered through the window, slowly illuminating the room, enveloping our bodies with warmth. How nice was it to wake up like this? This felt so peaceful. "What time is it?" Amanda lifted her body slowly as she raised her arm to support the bedsheets that were covering her body. I leaned back on the bed and yawned. Too early. I barely slept last night." Amanda glared at me and I shrugged my shoulders. "Whose fault do you think it is?" Amanda rolled her eyes and got out of bed. Our clothes were scattered all over the floor in a messy fashion, giving a perfect representation of the events of last night. Getting out of bed, she dragged the bedsheets with her and my body shivered. "Oi, the bedsheets. Don't complain." Amanda merely spared me a glance before taking the bedsheets with her. My teeth chattered and I hugged my body. "Why are you taking the bedsheets with you? I've already seen everything that is there to see. What are you being shy about? The less you see something, the more you desire it." Amanda's rebuttal instantly made me shut up and I sighed. "Alright, fine, whatever." To be honest, I doubted the validity of those words. There was simply no way I would ever get bored of what I had seen last night. Never. "Get changed. We're going to be late." Alright. I let out another sigh and then I sat up straight, picked up the clothes that were lying on the ground, and started putting them on in a slow manner. Due to the events that transpired in the assembly, I was unable to speak with Octavius, and as a result, we came to the conclusion that the best time for us to meet would be today. Thinking about Octavius, my thoughts were rather complicated. I was still confused about how a man with such a fixed mindset could have undergone such a dramatic transformation so quickly. What in the world did Kevin do to cause him to transform into this different person? I was genuinely curious. "I'm done. Already." The second time Amanda entered the room, she was dressed differently than the first time. This time she was wearing a sleek white one-piece suit that accentuated the natural curves of her body. Her long hair was pulled back into a tight ponytail, and she exuded an enticing fragrance from head to toe. She looked more mature. In the midst of me, admiring her beauty, she walked up to the drawer beside my bed and took out the pair of glasses that were resting there. It took a moment for me to register what was going on and I complained. "Wait, aren't those my glasses?" "They are." Amanda teased, putting on her glasses and heading to the living room, more specifically the kitchen. "Hold on, wait up." Hastily putting on my clothes, I rushed to her. Panic engulfed every part of my body. Flashes of memories resurfaced inside my mind and my complexion paled. "Wait, don't tell me that you're planning on making breakfast?" How did you know? As expected, Amanda's expression changed to one of bewilderment when she realized that I was aware of her intention to prepare breakfast. Amanda's brows furrowed, and she examined my clothing for a moment before shaking her head and cutting me off before I could say anything else. This won't do. You should go and change your clothes. You can't go like this. I'll make breakfast while you change. The tone of her voice was stern and so was her face. When I saw her expression, I realized that complaining about it would be a pointless use of my time. As a result, I went to the bathroom, took a shower, and then changed into more appropriate attire before going back to the living room. To tell you the truth, ever since Amanda had baked her cookies for me the last time, I had not eaten any of her food and I wasn't looking forward to it at all. If the previous experience with the cookies hadn't made it abundantly clear, then I didn't know what could. This morning is going to start off rough for sure, that much is certain. With a Pepto-Bismol at hand, I headed for breakfast, where I saw perfectly cooked sunny-side eggs with some bacon. I was immediately on guard, and I approached the chair as if it were the most formidable foe I had ever faced or would ever face. Jezebeth who? Not even Jezebeth placed me under such pressure. As expected, this was no normal egg, was it? The more perfect it looked on the outside, the warier of it I became. What are you doing? Eat quickly so the food doesn't become cold. We still have to leave in 15 minutes. Yeah. I responded, and as I did so, sweat began to form on either side of my hands. At the same time, I began praying to whichever god was out there. After slicing the bacon with the fork which I had just grabbed, I brought it to my mouth. At this point, I had already reconciled my feelings about the situation, and I took a bite of the bacon, expecting it to be the last one I would take for a while. After taking a few bites of the bacon, I was astonished to discover that it didn't actually have a taste that was all that unpleasant. In point of fact, I had already consumed the entire thing before I realized it, and I had already made my way to the eggs, which turned out to be surprisingly airy. I looked at Amanda with a skeptical eye. What happened? Did you order breakfast before I was done changing? Since when have deliveries become so fast? You could have bought it yesterday and reheated it. Then how does that explain the dishes over there? My brows furrowed to their fullest capacity as I looked at the dishes, which were indisputable proof that she had actually prepared the meal. It took me a while to process the information, and when I did, I looked at Amanda with an incredulous look. It's not spicy. Amanda cocked her head, her eyes narrowing into slits. She eventually shook her head. I didn't have to deal with cinnamon this time, so yeah. So you're saying that if you had cinnamon you would have made it spick? I was forcefully fed a mouthful of food by Amanda, who looked at me with a cold smile. Less talking and more eating. Fine. I retracted the fork from my mouth and carried on eating. After everything was said and done, the breakfast turned out to be quite delicious, and I felt very content after eating it. By the time I was done eating, Amanda had already eaten her breakfast and had gone to put her shoes on. I didn't waste any time cleaning the table before making my way to the front door, where Amanda was patiently waiting for me. I got out of the apartment, took my jacket with me and locked the door behind me as I went. There was not a single flaw to be found with my current morning. I awoke with a smile, enjoyed a delicious breakfast and felt more energized than I had in a very long time. Only that, at the precise moment that I emerged from the room, another figure emerged from his apartment at the opposite end of the corridor, and our eyes met. The surroundings froze and neither one of us moved. The last thing I remember hearing was Amanda's low murmur. The scream. My head subconsciously nodded. Not a bad office. I found a nice leather sofa, sat down and adjusted the pillows until I was completely at ease. At that moment, I was located in Octavios's office, which was located on the top floor of the Union Tower. I had to say, the view up here was amazing. I could see the entirety of Ashton City from where I sat. There didn't need to be anything said about how nice the view was. Currently, Octavius was sitting behind his desk with an expressionless look on his face. He was most probably waiting for me to finish looking around. I cleared my throat and leaned back on the chair. Without sparing a single second, I asked the one thing that had been bugging me from quite a while back. What did Kevin offer in order to have you become so OB? The chance to break through to SSS-rank. Octavius cut me mid-sentence and my mouth hung open. The what? I had to blink my eyes a couple of times in order to ensure that I wasn't hearing incorrectly. He just said the chance to break through to SSS-rank, right? Are you serious? Yes. Octavius nodded, clearly not trying to hide anything from me. I became even more shocked when I heard Octavius's confirmation. No way, did Kevin really do that? Everything started making sense to me, and when it did, I couldn't help but be amazed by Kevin's capabilities. It was necessary to take note of the fact that advancing past the SSS rank was extremely difficult, borderline impossible. The closer one became to the powers of the records, the more restrictions were set on them. There was a reason why there were so few SSS-rankers in the world, and it was because the Akashic records didn't want there to be that many in the first place. No, it was more accurate to say that it never even wanted an existence of that level to exist within its realm to begin with. And it was precisely because of this reason that it was almost impossible for someone to break through to SSS-rank. The fact that Kevin was somehow able to grant this ability to Octavius showed that his means were extremely deep. If I didn't already know how to break through, I would have been in the same position as Octavius and would have most likely needed to ask for his assistance. So in exchange for granting you the ability to break through to the next rank, you've decided to help him become the Alliance leader? That's correct. I see. Huh. I stopped myself mid-sentence and looked up at Octavius. Hold on, why are you telling me this? It was very strange that he ultimately divulged all of the information without me threatening or coercing him to do so in order to get him to talk. In fact, there was something extremely fishy about the situation. There's definitely a reason for why he's telling me this. I didn't have to wait long to understand. Kevin informed me that I was permitted to share this information with you. He also instructed me to tell you to vote for him in the upcoming elections for Alliance leader. Oh, and he also inquired as to whether your mercenary group will join the Alliance or not. I was honestly a little taken aback by the sudden request, but I eventually shook my head. I can vote for Kevin to become the leader of the Alliance, but my mercenary guild will not join. I have other plans for them, and we don't really work well with others, so it may be for the best that they are separated. I understand. Octavius nodded in a calm manner, seemingly having already expected such results. My brows furrowed when I saw this. Did Kevin predict this far as well? My hands clenched for a moment before I relaxed them. I wonder what's going on with Kevin's head these days. The more time that goes by, the more unfamiliar he seems to me in my thoughts. Without a doubt, the Kevin that I knew was no more, with the current Kevin being the real version of himself. Almost like me. I shifted my attention back toward Octavius and asked, "Is there anything else that you would like to tell me?" No. Octavius shook his head, his expression carrying the same indifference as in the past. Very well then. I stood up from my seat and turned to head for the exit of the room. Now that everything was done, I could finally carry out everything that I had been planning for a long time. I guess I've got to go back to the headquarters. Chapter 673, The Beginning of the End. 1. Day 5. Where's everyone? I was taken aback to discover that the lobby of the mercenary headquarters was completely deserted. At any given time, there would typically be at least one or two of the guys lounging about on the sofas. Guess everyone's busy. I eventually shrugged my shoulders. When I thought about the upcoming event, it made perfect sense. Indeed, I had given a significant amount of work to each of them. Without much consideration, I made my way to Ryan's room. Among all the people present, he was most likely the only one who knew where the others were. They were probably in the building, but the place was quite big, and since I needed to check up on Ryan, I decided to just ask him since he most probably had eyes on the entire place. Click. After making my way to Ryan's room and opening the door, I discovered Ryan hunched over with his back arched and his feet crossed on the chair as he was looking at more than 50 monitors in front of him. Displayed on the monitors were the different areas of Ashton City. "Oh, you're back." Ryan was quickly made aware of my presence, and after giving me a passing glance, he returned his focus to the screens. He most likely was aware that I was heading to him long ago and was just being casual about it. I approached him and placed my hand on the chair he was sitting on. "How's the situation?" "They haven't made any movements yet. Not notable ones, at least." "This is in Ashton City?" "Yes, same for the other cities. Still no major movement." "Okay." I nodded my head, struggling to keep up with Ryan, who looked at all the monitors in front of him without any trouble. In fact, every 2 seconds the screens would switch and new areas would appear on the monitors. While this happened, Ryan would write a couple of notes on a small book that rested next to his keyboard before switching the screens again. He kept doing this for all the 50 screens in front of him, and my head started to throb at the sight. "I'll leave you to it." I gave the back of the chair a light pat before turning around. When I was on the verge of leaving, I suddenly recalled the purpose of my visit here and asked, "By the way, do you have any idea where the others are?" I didn't see anyone in the lob. "Training room," Ryan responded before I could even finish my sentence. I pursed my lips and nodded my head. "All right, good luck with your job." It appeared as though Ryan was too preoccupied with what he was doing. It was to the point where he did not care about me at all. It didn't really bother me, as I knew his role in the upcoming war was going to be very important. I had a lot of things planned out for the upcoming events, and Ryan was going to play a significant part in all of them. Well, everyone will. I had not chosen my members randomly. They were all selected with this event in mind, and it was time for me to finally bear the fruit of their nurturing. Bang! As I got closer to the training room, the first thing that I heard was a loud crashing sound, followed by what I took to be Hein's voice. Whack! "Take it easy. I'm not made of Diamo." Whack! Bang! What's going on here? When I first walked into the training room, I didn't know what to make of the events that were taking place there. Han Yufei, who was standing opposite Hein and who was all beaten up and full of bruises, continued to punch him relentlessly while he begged for mercy. Behind Hein was Leopold, who had a pack of gums in his hand and was cheering for Han Yufei. "Go. Go. Beat up him. You're supposed to be on my side." Whack. Oh right. I honestly didn't know how to respond to the sudden situation. Letting out a long and extended sigh, my eyes drifted toward a young girl who sat at the back of the room, and I made my way toward her. "How long has this been going for?" "About the last 3 hours." Ava responded, holding her hand up and staring at the numerous small birds that were resting there. Beside her were also multiple cats and mouses, snuggling around her body. The sight surprised me and I pointed at them. She answered before I could even ask. "It's a lot easier for me to control animals that have not been too impacted by the mana in the air." "I see. And how many can you control?" "If you're not talking about beasts affected by mana, which are currently at 50, then about 1,000. She answered, raising her head and looking up at me. My eyes jumped up in surprise. 1,000? That many? I could probably push it to a couple hundred more, but that would drain my mana instantly. Ava mused to herself, lowering her head and massaging her chin. "I've also completed what you've asked me to do and set up multiple stations around the city just like you've asked. I also already coordinated myself with Ryan, so if anything happens he will be the first to let you know." "Perfect." I smiled in satisfaction. Ava's progress was a lot faster than I had expected. Everything so far was flowing in accordance with what I had envisioned. Ryan acted as the eyes and Ava as the ears. With Ryan's access to all of the cameras in the city as well as Ava's network of animals scattered throughout the city, I had complete control over what was going on in Ashton City. Be it those that were on my side or those that weren't. Nothing could escape my sight and ears. "Alright, keep up the good work." Satisfied with the progress, I stood up and decided to head out of the training room. Just before leaving, I scanned the room and asked, "By the way, I don't see Liam anywhere. Do you have any idea where he is?" Ava cocked her head to the side to look at me, then tapped on the face of her watch and shut her eyes before responding. "He's roaming Ashton City. He's currently in the Northern District, Guvian Park. I think he's lost." "Okay. Well, there you go." The effectiveness of the information network that I had established. She was able to provide me with precise information regarding Liam's location in a matter of seconds. A satisfied smile spread across my face and I headed out of the room. Even though I could still hear Hein's helpless screams in the background, I didn't pay them any attention. My mind was preoccupied with other thoughts. Now that the information network has been completely set up and I've got eyes on the entirety of Ashton City, it's time that I push up my next plans. I had a grand total of 5 days left before the human domain would all of a sudden face a catastrophe that had never been seen before. During those 5 days, I intended to finish putting everything in place before handing over responsibility for the rest to Kevin. Because from that point on, I will begin the process of developing a new sword art and incorporating the demonic bloodline into my body. Only then would I be able to reach a point where I could fight toe-to-toe against Malik al-Shaitan. Ring. As I emerged from the training room, the first thing I noticed was Angelica making her way in my direction. She had a rather serious expression on her face, and my face changed when I noticed this. "What's wrong? Did something happen?" "No, not really." Angelica shook her head. After that, she reached out her hand, at which point a dark radiance emanated from her and covered her entire arm. I was taken aback by her behavior at first, but then I understood exactly what it was that she was attempting to let me see. "You're about to break through to Duke rank?" "Correct." Angelica nodded her head, retrieving her hand and lowering it. "I've been close to breaking through for quite a while now, but I haven't had the opportunity to do so." "And you found that opportunity?" "No." Angelica shook her head, a complicated look flashing across her face as she explained. "I'm speaking with you because I have not yet discovered that opportunity. It appears that the demonic energy on Earth is too weak for me to be of any help to me." "Right. Indeed, Earth was the last planet that the demons had set foot on, and the demonic energy was at a drastically lower level than that of Amora and the other planets that had been conquered. Angelica was facing a similar situation to what I was facing when I was back in Amora, trying to break through." "Do you not have enough devil fruits or something?" "No." Angelica shook her head once more. "Not of the level that can help me break through to the Duke rank." My brows knit. Her problem was indeed a big one. Her breaking through to Duke rank would be an enormous boost to our overall power. If possible, I wanted to help her break through as soon as possible. When I turned my attention back to her, I could see that she was in her own thoughts. "Looks like my days are going to become harder." I sighed internally as I came to the realization that she most likely already had a solution in mind, one that it was highly likely that I would not like. I then asked, "You seem to have an idea in mind sharing it with me?" "I plan on returning to the demon realm." I took a deep breath and closed my eyes for a moment to process the information. As expected. To be honest, I had a feeling that she would say something like this. Opening my eyes again and looking at her, I nodded my head. "Do you know how to get there? Will you be able to go there unnoticed? I remember that your family is quite important there. There shouldn't be any problems, right?" Angelica's eyes dulled and she looked at me strangely. "What's with all the questions? Are you my mom?" I scratched my cheek in embarrassment. "Well, I don't want anything to happen to any of you. It's not like I can help it." PFT. Angelica let out a strange sound and immediately followed it up by covering her mouth with her hand. My eyes immediately squinted. "Did you just laugh? You're imagining things." Angelica feigned ignorance and turned her head slightly. This obviously didn't escape my line of sight. "No, I really don't think so." That was without a doubt a laugh. Yet Angelica kept her face straight as she looked at me. In the need, I could only relent at her indifference. I waved my hand and gestured for her to leave. "All right, go, just make sure to come back in 3 months. That's most likely when I'll finally start to make my move. I'd like it if you were there during that time." "Okay." Angelica nodded her head and turned around. "I'll be leaving in 5 days. Once the dungeons will start to overload, I'll use the chance to go back. I'll help as much as I can before that." "All right, thanks." After that, Angelica left, and the environment around me became very quiet. Before I went into my private room, I raised my hand and took out a vial that was filled with a dark liquid. Complicated thoughts flashed before my eyes when I stared at the vial. I guess I should also get ready. These were going to be 3 long months. Chapter 674, The Beginning of the End. Russell. Kevin pushed the sheets to the side of the bed before slowly getting out of bed and putting on his clothes. During the time that he spent changing his clothes, he could make out the sound of Emma's faint breathing behind him. After donning his pants and shirt, he made his way slowly towards the window of the room and stared out at the clear sky. It was still very early in the morning and the sun was just beginning its ascent over the horizon, an orange tint covering the lower ends of the world. All sorts of complicated thoughts flashed across Kevin's mind as he gazed at the sky. It was filled with an utter sense of tranquility and silence. If only this can last for longer. Kevin was aware that this state of calm wouldn't last for very long and that the world would once again descend into anarchy in a matter of time. "I guess I should get started." Taking his eyes away from the horizon, he quickly turned his attention back to Emma and sat down on her desk. Taking out a pen, he began writing on the paper before folding it neatly and placing it in a small envelope that vanished at the flick of his finger. "That's one done." The moment the envelope left, he wrote a new one and repeated the same process. Kevin kept doing the same thing over and over, and it wasn't until he heard Emma's voice that he finally stopped. "What are you doing?" Kevin broke into a smile when he felt someone or something gently embrace him from behind. "I'm only working on a few things. It won't take me long to complete. Just give me an hour." "I'm sure." Emma let go of Kevin and headed out of the room. Crack. The instant that she left the room, Kevin's smile vanished, and the pen that he was holding snapped in half. "I fucked up." Day 4. The streets of Ashton City were bustling with activity as the sun blazed brilliantly in the sky above. Ivana was out and about in the city when her appearance attracted the attention of pedestrians near her. She was currently concealing her face with a pair of large sunglasses, but the fact that she had long red hair and was tall was not something she could hide. As a result, those who were walking next to her were naturally drawn to her appearance. "I wonder how long this sight will last." Ivana pondered to herself as she came to a stop in front of a massive building that rose up toward the sky. The joyful expressions on people's faces, the large crowds of people walking around the city without any clue about what was happening. Ivana was aware that the scene she was seeing would not be preserved for a very long time. After the election of a new leader for the Alliance, which would take place within the next 2 days, the sirens would be activated, and everyone would in turn be directed toward the bunkers that have been prepared by the Union. Ivana took off her glasses, showing off her stunning eyes and face. Then, without giving it a second thought, she went ahead and entered the building. "Let's sort out the situation with my guild first." As soon as she stepped foot inside the building, virtually everyone's attention was drawn to her, and an eerie silence spread throughout the area. Ivana raised her eyebrows when she sensed that everyone in the building was staring at her. "What's wrong? Has everyone forgotten how I look?" Her voice broke them out of their daze and everyone finally reacted. "The Guildmaster is back." The Guildmaster. Ivana's entrance into the building elicited a range of responses from the individuals on the building's first floor. The majority of those individuals displayed a sense of pleasant surprise as their predominant expression. There were obviously some people who were unable to hide their displeasure, and despite the fact that they did their best to hide their reactions, Ivana noticed them and made a mental note of them right away. Nothing could escape her sight. "Guildmaster, you're finally back." A stocky man ran up to her and wiped the sweat that had accumulated on his forehead. He stopped and looked at her as if he had just seen the savior of the world. "Thank God you're back. The guild has been in shambles since your departure, and everyone has been wondering when you would return." The name of the plump man was Chris, and he held the position of vice guild leader of the Red Cross Guild, which was the guild that Ivana had founded. Given her free-spirited personality, TT wasn't out of the ordinary for her to vanish for more than a couple of months to pursue her own interests, leaving Chris to be responsible for all of the guild's responsibilities. A month of her absence wasn't typically that difficult, but she had been missing for over 2 years. Ivana had been absent from the guild for over 2 years. 2 fucking years, and it was this absence that contributed to the general chaos that prevailed there as a result of her absence. Even though he was capable, Chris wasn't exactly a very powerful person. He had never been treated with respect and was worn down to the marrow of his bones. He had already planned to resign the following month, but after finally seeing the guild master return, all of those thoughts vanished and he started having second thoughts. Maybe, just maybe, things were going to get better now. "Stop complaining." Ivana shot Chris a glare before brushing her hair behind her ear and looking around the place. Crossing her arms together, she tapped on the upper side of her right arm. "I'm finally back from my hunt, where I was able to acquire numerous valuable items. During my absence, it seems that the guild has not been doing so well. I'm a little disappointed, but I knew your capabilities were limited from the moment I took you in." Ivan lowered her head and gazed at Chris while reassuring him. "Don't worry. I won't be leaving anytime soon." She cut off her sentence abruptly as a white letter materialized in front of her, floating before her eyes, startling the people in the lobby. "What's this?" Ivana's brows furrowed the moment she saw the letter, and as she reached out to grab it, a curious expression appeared on her face. After opening it and reading through its contents, she suddenly raised both of her eyebrows, and it wasn't long before a dangerous smile appeared on her face. "Interesting." Ivana made a motion with her hand and the letter caught fire in midair. Without looking at Chris, she vanished from her spot. Not before saying a couple of more words. I take it back, I'll be back later. Wait, what? No. Chris's face turned white, and he kneeled down on the ground in front of where she previously stood. His countenance was etched with a look of utter despondency as he tapped onto his clothes. My resignation letter. Where is it? Starlight Guild, Jin's office. Jin was seated at his usual desk, compiling the documents that his grandfather had assigned to him. Since his return from Imora, which came about as a result of him wanting to run away from his grandfather's blind date arrangements, he had been blindsided by a truckload of work that came as a result of his grandfather's ire. The only thing that had been able to appease his grandfather's wrath was the news that he had advanced to the S rank. His grandfather's anger was then channeled toward his father, who unfortunately ended up playing the role of the scapegoat. The sound of Jin's pen scribbling echoed in the room, and his eyes began to wander across the many papers that were in front of him. He let out a long sigh when he noticed the stack of papers on his desk. I should have never have come back. He had a great deal of pleasure engaging in combat with the demons that lived in Imora, in spite of its dangers. That was a great deal more entertaining than whatever it was that he was doing at the moment. Jin was startled when a letter materialized out of nowhere in front of him, and his brows briefly jumped. He reached out with his hand to take hold of the letter, and then he opened it. His expression gradually changed as he read the letter, and he reclined in his chair. Covering his eyes with his arm, he murmured, "This is crazy." Certain letters resembling those received by Ivana and Jean began to appear in front of individuals throughout the human domain, all of whom wielded considerable power within the domain of humans. Donna, Monica, Douglas, Maximum. No one was exempt, as everyone received the same white letter. When they each read the letter, they showed a variety of responses, but in general none of them seemed to be displeased with whatever was written in the letter. Inside a white room that was covered in darkness, Rin sat in the middle of the room with his legs crossed, sweat dripping down his back, and his hair drenched to the fullest extent possible. His diaphragm was constantly moving in an ascending and descending motion with each breath he took. At first glance, it did not appear as though there was anything wrong with Ren. However, when a white letter that had a tinge of golden color appeared in front of him, lighting the area around him, his features became more distinguishable. There were black veins visible all over his face, black scales on his arms that were slowly building over his skin, and two small husks that were beginning to form on the top of his head. Ren looked like a far cry from how he normally looked. What's this? At the very moment that the letter materialized in front of Ren, the scales that covered his body vanished, along with the husk and the veins. Within the space of a few seconds, he looked exactly the same as he normally did, with the exception of his complexion, which was extremely pale. Itchy. His breathing was laborious and he was resting on the ground on all four. It took him at least 5 minutes to regain his composure before he turned his attention back to the letter that had suddenly materialized in front of him. He grabbed onto the letter and opened it. You know what to do. The letter was only 5 words long, but Rin knew exactly who had written it, and his brows furrowed in annoyance as he read it. Fine. Rin crumpled the letter in his hand before discarding it and grabbing a towel to wipe the sweat from his body. After that, he sat back down on the ground and murmured to himself while keeping both of his legs crossed. Monarch's Indifference. Chapter 675, The Beginning of the End. 3. Day 3. Monolith Headquarters. In a grand hall dimly lit by a large chandelier, 20 people sat on 10 golden thrones set along the sides of the hall, with a large empty throne at the end of the corridor. The throne was jet black in color and was significantly larger than the golden thrones that were present in the room. It was clear to whom the throne belonged to. There were approximately 20 people in the room, and they all looked at each other with expressions that conveyed cold calculation and hostility. Is everyone here? Mo Jinhao, who was seated on the throne that was adjacent to the one that was situated in the center of the room, was the first person to speak as his gray eyes swept over the entirety of the room. He crossed his legs and rested his arms over his legs. Everyone should already know why we have gathered today, no? When is the leader coming? Nobody in the room seemed interested in what Mo Jinhao had to say as they all went about their business. It was clear from the get-go that Mo Jinhao's authority wasn't high enough to influence the people that were present in the hall. Each person who was there in the hall had the same level of power as one of the 7 heads of the union, and yet they were all distinctly different from one another in terms of their power and what they specialized in. The only person who responded was a man positioned on the golden throne opposite him. He had a warm smile spread across his face as he spoke. Objectively speaking, he was handsome. He had sharp, nicely structured facial features that made him look like a celebrity. That was until one paused toward his eyes, which seemed to be devoid of any emotion and weren't smiling, unlike his face. Clementine Manuel, an SS ranker of the Monolith, and one of the elders part of the Monolith Council. His empty gaze gave him a heavy atmosphere. We are aware of why we are present. Just that we have many tasks to complete in preparation for what is to come. Not all of us have the time to waste here discussing irrelevant details that we already know. It is not useless. Mo Jinhao answered, his voice devoid of any emotion, and the room became even tenser. Please stop it, you two. It was at this moment that another voice spoke up. The voice belonged to a woman with long, glossy brown hair and strong brows who sat on the opposite end of the Clementine. The thinness of her dress revealed her cleavage, and the fact that she was leaning against the armrest of the throne exposed her legs, which were crossed together. The leader is on his way, and we don't want the place to turn nasty before he arrives, do we? Her words had a peculiar allure to them, and as a result, both Clementine and Mo Jinhao were compelled to stop talking and take a step back in an unusual manner. This wasn't done out of fear, but rather out of an abundance of caution. Miranda Black, another one of the elders in the Monolith Council and SS ranker. She was also arguably the second most powerful person in the room. Her powers didn't lay in her appearance, but rather her formidable power, which granted her the ability to control the mind of someone that was within close proximity of hers. If caught unaware, even one of the elders of the council would find themselves brainwashed and taken control by her. The Puppet Master was the nickname given to her, and she without a doubt deserved her name. You know what we should care about more? Miranda's eyes grew colder as her hand drummed against the throne's armrest. She looked around the room at the other 20 or so people before responding coldly. We should think about how to deal with the little rat that slaughtered all the spies I had painstakingly raised. Do you realize how difficult it is to raise puppets of that caliber? The air around her started to become denser, and her hair slowly raised up. As Miranda's hair began to twist, it began to fall in random directions across her face. The door unexpectedly opened just as she was about to say something else, and Hemlock walked straight in. As soon as he came into view, there was a sudden and total hush that spread throughout the room, and each of the 20 senior citizens who were there bowed their heads. None dared to raise it apart from Mo Jinhao. When they raised their heads again, Hemlock was already sitting on the large throne with his hand propped up on the armchair of the throne, which caused the bottom of his chin to be elevated slightly. I see that all of you have already made yourself comfortable. Idealism, the unrealistic aim for perfection. The unwillingness to compromise over something for the sake of maintaining perfection, and what the Union was in Hemlock's eyes. An idealistic organization that was unwilling to do whatever it took to save humanity. But that was fine, there was a reason why the monolith existed. If the Union was unwilling to take the steps necessary to save humanity, then it would be Hemlock's job to do the things that they couldn't do. Everyone in the room felt a chill run down their spine as Hemlock's eyes icily swept across the group of approximately 20 people who were present. The room remained silent until Hemlock took his gaze away and closed his eyes. Most of you already know by now what happened a little while back during the assembly. As soon as those words left Hemlock's mouth, the atmosphere immediately began to become extremely tense. No one dared to utter a single word, allowing for Hemlock to continue talking. Upon reflection, this was my fault. Some might say it was a mistake, but it wasn't all that bad. In fact, I had anticipated that something similar would transpire. The forces we lost are not insignificant, but with this small purge, we have managed to increase our forces' hatred for the human domain. Whatever Blood had done was by no means small. In fact, the damage that the monolith sustained was quite heavy. Hemlock was only downplaying the damage over here, and it was a very good reason. Setting that topic aside, has one of you had the surgery done? Yes. 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 Everyone answered almost unanimously. When Hemlock saw that everyone had nodded their heads, there was a look of obvious contentment on his face. Hemlock made the decision to increase their investment in the chips after the chips were shown to be successful with test subject 876, also known as Rundover. The result was a chip that was many times more powerful than the old prototype, which was currently implanted in the heads of almost all of the Monolith executives, including the lower-ranked warriors. This chip alone gave Hemlock the confidence to win the war, and it was also what made Everblood's stunt so painful because many of the soldiers who died had the chip in their heads. Although I do find the chip quite useful now that I have it, is it really necessary for all of us to have it implanted into us? A dark burly man asked. Rowan calmed scratched the back of his bald head while sitting with his arms crossed and his legs spread apart. His expression conveyed a hint of dissatisfaction. The air around him was extremely oppressive. Hemlock gazed at him and smiled. Of course, shouldn't we all take advantage of every little advantage that is available to us? Someone gives you power, why refuse it? I guess. Rowan eventually calmed down and leaned back in his chair. Rowan stopped making a scene and just closed his eyes instead of arguing with Hemlock. This may have been because he was afraid of Hemlock and didn't want to anger him, or it may have been because he had some inkling that what Hemlock had to say had some truth to it. No one really knew, nor were they interested in knowing. Opening his eyes again, Rowan tried to change the topic. What about you, leader? Do you also have a chip? Of course. Like I said, I would never refuse any power that is given to me. As a matter of fact, Hemlock had implanted a chip inside of his head in the same manner as the others had. His chip, on the other hand, was unique in comparison to theirs. Given that the chip installed in 870's head was only a beta prototype, there was no self-detonating function installed within it in case the subject refused to obey orders. There was a tracking device, but that was about it. After all the money that he had invested in the development of the chip, Hemlock had managed to get someone to install a self-detonating device that would kill anyone within the vicinity of the chip. The power that was hidden behind the detonating device was devastating, and it was something that Hemlock had secretly done in order to have a better control over the entire organization. No one could go against him. He wasn't an idealistic man. Hemlock had no principles, and for him the perfect method was the one that would give him the ability to accomplish his goal. Regarding those that developed the chip, it was a bit unfortunate, but it had to be done. Apart from him and a few other people, no one could know about this little secret of his, which would serve as a weapon of last resort. I hope it doesn't have to come this far. After all, Hemlock wasn't crazy. He definitely wasn't. He was the future savior of humanity. He was someone who was going to prevent the extinction of the human race. There was no way someone like him could be crazy. That's right, I'm not crazy. Everyone else just isn't smart enough to understand what I'm doing. It is time that I brought them back to their senses and showed them just how cruel reality is. Hemlock abruptly stood up and turned to face the Monolith's council members. The air around him began to rumble, and a pall of tension descended into the room, making it difficult for everyone to breathe. Dark scales began to form around Hemlock's cheeks and arms as wings sprouted from behind him, and his demonic bloodline began to suppress that of everyone else present. We have 4 more days before the truce ends. I want everyone to get ready before then and do as originally planned. Make sure to not kill any human. Our priority is converting as many humans on our side. Not kill them. This idealistic world that others were living in. He was going to crush it.